In this season of Race, Health, and Happiness, we're using a global lens, and I'm mainly speaking to leaders who live outside of Canada. But we can't forget our own homegrown heroes. The last three guests were from the United States, but we are making a pit stop back in Canada to speak to Nam Kiwanuka, a phenomenal woman and journalist who has lived in Canada and a few countries on the continent of Africa. We get to hear from her before we depart on the next leg of our journey, which will be episodes focused on South Africa. I really enjoyed my conversation with Nam, and I hope you do too. It's not enough to survive in this racialized world. We're learning together to surthrive. This is Race, Health, and Happiness, and I'm your host, Dr. O. In this episode, we talk with Nam Kiwanuka, host of The Agenda with Steve Paikin, host of TVO's latest project, The Thread with Nam Kiwanuka, and host of The Agenda in the Summer. She co-hosts TVO's On Docs podcast and contributes columns to TVO.org. She was born in Uganda and lived in a refugee camp in Kenya before moving to London, Ontario. She worked with BET, Much Music, and the BBC's Focus on Africa. Nam, welcome to Race, Health, and Happiness.
Hi, Dr. O. I'm so excited to be here. Actually, our roles are reversed because you were on the agenda a few years back, and yes. I had the opportunity to learn from you. So I'm excited to be here.
It's just such an honor to have you on the show because I was so nervous that day being on TVO and having watched you on Much Music, right?
Yeah, well, it's so funny because I learned, when I first came to Canada, I learned how to speak English by watching TVO. So working here has been just kind of like one of those full circle moments. But anyway, I'm glad we get to spend this time together where it's not as formal.
Yes. And hopefully, we'll have some fun while we do it. Because that's what surthrival is about. It's about finding that joy.
I love that thirst. Okay, I have a stutter, so I probably can't say it. But that's something that a lot of people don't know. Mm-hmm. I had a stutter as a kid.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there's certain words and also English is my fourth language. So there's certain words that my tongue is like, nope. Not going to do that.
Okay. You know what, girl? It's okay. I'll say it for you. But the bottom line is it's finding for us, particularly as Black women, that Black joy, that Black girl magic, while we resist and engage in the struggle that is part of our identities. Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of identity, though, my first question for all my guests is, what is your superpower? And I know about so many wonderful things that you do, but I'm curious what you think about your superpower. What is the gift that you have been brought here, in this world to give us, Nam?
Whew. You're not going to start easy. I think my superpower would be the ability to let things roll off my back. And I say that because I always find myself in situations, or I'm always in rooms, places where I kind of have to bend to the situation that I'm in. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I've ever been somewhere where I felt like I fit in 100%. Like even like being born in Uganda and being, mixed ethnicity and the way that I was treated there by even family members, and then coming to Canada and living in a very homogenous community like London, Ontario, and then trying to navigate that, and then coming to Toronto and then figuring out, oh, okay, this is how I do it. But I do think it is a superpower because you learn how to not take things so personally. And I feel like when you get to that point, it makes you feel a bit more free.
Right.
There's always that moment when you feel, when you feel it in your chest or your stomach, wherever whatever part of your body speaks to you to like tell you you're in danger or anything like that. But I feel it, and then I kind of identify that feeling, and then I understand what it is, and then I just kind of let it go.
Oh, that's powerful because some people are not aware of what's happening in their body, that their body is speaking to them, but you can feel it, you can see it, and then, recognize it and say, hello, discomfort, I see you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let you go. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
And it took a while to come to it. A couple of years ago, I started having panic attacks, and I was like, what is happening? Because I've always been very much in control. Like my mind has been the thing that, because honestly, you can be in any kind of situation. You can have like a wonderful life, but if you see it as not being a wonderful life, it's not a wonderful life.
Yes.
Or you can be in a situation where it's challenging, but the way that you see it, it can be, okay, this is fine. But a few years ago, I started having panic attacks, and I felt like I was out of control. And then I went into therapy. I saw a therapist, and I was able to kind of unravel why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And it's been, so since then, I've just kind of, it's helped me a lot to kind of calm my nerves and like, oh, okay, this is what that is. And I didn't realize that even before I had the panic attack, that I had been navigating my life like that. I didn't realize that I had always been one of, that was something that helped me navigate really challenging situations, was just being able to like let things roll off my back, and just how my mind framed the situations helped me to get through them.
Pause. I just want to flag this tension of her superpower, which is letting things roll off her back, but then later experiencing panic attacks and knowing when to get help. We'll come back to this again at the end of the episode.
I didn't realize that I had always been one of, that was something that helped me navigate really challenging situations, was just being able to like let things roll off my back, and just how my mind framed the situations helped me to get through them.
I see. Now that is a superpower, being able to help your mind frame the situation. I've also seen that in literature as well. And it's practiced in like, Buddhism and a lot of mindfulness, right? Sometimes it's not just what happens to us, but the meaning we attribute to it, the way we cope with it, all of that can affect us. And I mean, there's a book, The Body Keeps Score.
Yes, right? Yes. This is one of my favorite books. Yep.
Yes. So when we're internalizing these things and keeping them, but we have to be conscious of it though, but not in denial of it, of what's going on, and think about that. So I think we'll dive into some of these challenges, and you can tell us what some of these challenges were. But I have a curious question, because you said being coming from a multi-ethnic family. And so I wonder about that, because for me, I'm half Nigerian, half Trini, and I grew up in Montreal. So I can fit in a lot of different places, but I never fit in a group where, quote unquote, everybody is like me. So I'm the outsider insider everywhere I go. But in a way, I appreciate that, because I'm more comfortable, I guess, being uncomfortable. I like mixed spaces because I just never grew up in a situation where everybody was like me or shared similar values. Whereas I find people who grew up in homogenous communities, it's very hard to break out because they want that comfort. I'm not familiar with that comfort, because even in my household, there were different cultures like interacting and sometimes conflicting all the time. So what are your two different ethnicities, and does what some of what I said kind of relate to you as well?
Yeah, I totally relate. And I think it's interesting. A lot of people are very uncomfortable being uncomfortable. And that's all I've ever known. And I think it does make you, I think maybe this is why I do well in this field, because as a kid, I was very shy. And then being around people would just, now I meet people all the time from different backgrounds, but I'm able to talk to people from different backgrounds, different whatevers, because I've never fit in anywhere. So if I meet somebody, it's not like you have to look like me and sound like me. And I've never been in that situation. So my background is my father is half Scottish. I've never really talked to anybody about this. But I'm going to tell you, Doctor. Okay. I'm actually doing like a family, one of those DNA things.
Genealogy, yeah.
Yes. So I'm doing one of those DNA things, and I'm trying to figure out what my lineage is, because being born in a civil war, there's a lot of things that happen that, that are just are complicated, that families don't want to talk about, but
yes.
It falls on the individual, especially I think for a lot of us. Well, for me, when I had kids, a lot of things that I just kind of let roll off my back, I wanted to interrogate more, because even when you go to the doctors and the doctor's asking about family history of whatever, I'm like, I don't know. That's usually my standard answer. I'm like, I really don't know my family history, because I don't have like grandparents, great grandparents. I don't have that. I don't have aunties and uncles, and my parents were very young, and there's been questions of like, was my dad really my dad? That kind of thing, right? So,
which is a common thing.
Which is very common. Yeah. And so those are the things that I'm trying to figure out. But when I was a kid, I had very light skin, blue eyes. My mother is a Ugandan woman, and people would mistaken her for the nanny. And we had, and my mom,
and your dad is half Irish, or he's full Irish?
He's half Scottish, but
half Scottish, half.
I think I don't know.
And do you know what his other half was?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
Those are the things I'm trying to figure out.
Question mark. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't even know if he's really like my father. Those are things that I'm trying to figure out, because these are questions that I have, just the way my family dynamics are. But my mother, she left our family when I was around 5. And it's not like to say, oh, she's a bad person, whatever. It's not that simplistic. There was a war going on. She was very young when she had us. And, since I became a mother, I actually understood her more, and I'm not mad at her. I was hurt for a little bit, but I'm not mad, and whatever. Things happen. And I think the older we all get, you realize that your parents are people before they had you, right?
Yes,
it's not so simple, like you're mine. We don't have ownership over our parents, and parents shouldn't have ownership over their children. That's the way that that's how I see it. But my mother, I had a recent conversation with her about 5 years ago, because growing up in that environment, there was shame around having children who weren't like 100% whatever Ugandan. And growing up, I was called the devil. I was spat on. People threw things at me. And the first time we went back to Uganda, I think I was 19 or 20, and someone threw a shoe at me. We went to the place where we used to live, and the person was very hostile towards me until someone said that's so-and-so's daughter, and they actually lived here. But he wasn't like throwing shoes at, the white people there. He was throwing, there was a kind of like white people there were treated differently than mixed race people. Like mixed race people were kind of looked at as being like there's a kind of being as if tainted, kind of like this idea that you're beneath everybody, like you're at the bottom, and so that kind of thing. But anyway, a few years ago, I had this conversation with my mother, and I said, whenever I was around you, and the first time I saw you, you were apologizing to your friend because of how light I was. And I felt like you were ashamed. Like it felt really uncomfortable for me because she was speaking in Uganda and she thought that I didn't understand. I don't really speak the language anymore, but I still understand it. And I understood what she said, what her friend said. It wasn't a very nice thing about me. And she said, I always got the impression that you were ashamed of my skin color. And she admitted it. And she said that was one of the reasons why she left. Also other things, but like we've never had that connection because, the people that she came from the community looked down on it. But the irony is that her mother used to love me tough. I have those core memories with my mother's mother, my Jaja, and she was very good to me. But I never had that relationship with my mother, like that maternal, like this is my child, and so I am on those. I am used to not fitting in places where. Another example, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, they used to have the black prom.
No, I didn't know they used to have a black. I know black graduation. I don't know black prom. Okay.
Yeah, they used to have a black prom in Toronto, and it was like a big deal. It's like for all of us who never really got to go to our proms because we were going to schools that, maybe we were the only person. And so I was really excited to go to the black prom. And the minute I walked in, somebody said, a young woman said, "Why are you here? You don't belong here." And so it's always been about navigating those spaces where I don't fit into this place, I don't fit into that place.
Right.
But honestly, I do see it as a gift in the sense that I can talk to many people, and it's allowed me to kind of, I don't know, I guess adopted, I don't know what if I'm being honest, there is that kind of longing where I don't think I belong anywhere, because if I was, a lot of my family would go to Uganda and be like, I want to move back to Uganda. I'm like, I don't, because even though when I first went back to Uganda and the plane touched down the tarmac at Entebbe airport, I bawled because I'm like, this is where I was born. But even though I am from that place, when I'm there, I'm looked at as if I'm a stranger, as if I'm a foreigner,
a foreigner.
An outsider. Yeah. So, it is what it is.
No, I think so. I want to thank you for sharing that, because there's so many layers in there that I think many of us can actually identify with, because a lot of those things are still the after effects of oppression, right? Whether it's from colonization or not colonization, it's still oppression, right? Oppressed people oppress people. It plays out in different ways, but of course, for myself being half Trinidadian, there's layers of secrecy and shame that come through the legacy of slavery, of people not knowing, their history and that kind of thing, or not wanting to share, even if they do know some things. There's colorism. So you talked about colorism, whereas for a lot of us who come through the transatlantic slave trade or North America, or even in Nigeria, lighter skin is usually actually treated better than darker skin. But what you describe is a different dynamic, but still shows the legacy of colonization, in the sense that a white person is not getting a shoe thrown at them. Their space is being respected, but then you who are of mixed background or mixed ancestry, you then become the victim of the oppression, right? Oppressing within the group. But that's still learned, right? That's a learned response somehow, that the white person doesn't get the shoe, but the mixed person does.
Yeah, but I also recognize that living in this society, my skin color affords me certain privileges. Correct. I hate calling it light skin privilege, because it feels as if, because of my skin color, therefore I'm treated better. When I was younger, I knew this from when I was 17. I could get a job at Wendy's, but my brothers, every time they try to find a job, could never find work.
And they're darker skin?
They have darker skin, yeah. And they ended up, my one brother ended up like washing dishes in a kitchen. But if I went to an office, I was hired. And even being on TV, I'm very cognizant of the fact that if I was darker, I probably wouldn't have had those same opportunities.
Pause. Let's talk about colorism, which is a form of discrimination where lighter-skinned, racialized people experience privilege over their darker-skinned counterparts. As Nam pointed out, this experience varies from country to country. But because we live in a society where whiteness means power and blackness defines the boundaries of the melanin spectrum, the darker you are, the greater the disadvantage. American researchers have shown time and time again that within a racial group, people with darker skin earn less money, live in worse neighborhoods, and report worse health. Even a Canadian study showed that darker-skinned Black people reported worse health than their lighter-skinned counterparts. And even white Canadians who had darker skin tone were more likely to report poorer health. We need to be intentional about addressing colorism within our own racialized groups, because colorism in North America is part of the legacy of structural white supremacy. Like almost everything, the first step is recognizing it and then calling it out.
My one brother ended up like washing dishes in a kitchen. But if I went to an office, I was hired. And even being on TV, I'm very cognizant of the fact that if I was darker, I probably wouldn't have had those same opportunities. Because I remember when I was hired at Much Music, part of the draw for I remember one person saying something about, the way that I looked and my eyes and this and that, and it's so unique, it's so exotic, and we know what that means, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things where I don't, I recognize that being in this society, I'm treated better because I have lighter skin.
Yeah. And so, colorism, that's what I'm saying. It can work either way. In Uganda, it worked for you in a way that you were treated lesser than, and then certainly here in North America brings benefit. Mm-hmm. But even as you told these stories of challenge and you talked about your mom, I saw the manifestation basically of your superpower, because as you began to talk about, what you yearned for with your mom, almost in the same sentence, it was a quick swivel, you went to your grandmother, right? You found positive meaning, you found positive connection in that maternal linkage. And then, talking about, some of the positives and things like that. So it's interesting because as you speak, I see the superpower play out, right? And it's important. I think I'm amplifying it, not just to kind of say it to you or whatever, but it's an important skill actually to be able to do that, to recognize something, not be in denial about something, but then to seek the positive, because we do need that, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've had so many moments like that in your life. I don't think we're going to be able to kind of talk about each one, but I'm really curious about your experience as a refugee here in Canada. So you talked a little bit about by the time you were 17 and, that kind of thing, but I know your journey to Canada was not an easy one at all. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you want to speak a little bit to that, but I read that I think you were 10 or 11 years old and had to stay in a refugee camp, but basically you walked from the equivalent of like Toronto to Chicago in distance at, that age. I wouldn't even drive that distance personally. I want to fly. Okay. I wouldn't drive to Chicago, let alone I'm being real. Let alone walk that distance as a child. So, what was that process like, and what did you think Canada would be like? Did you have a vision of, something like that, or were you too young and just listening to dad and getting across, to safety was the priority. What was that like?
It was, I do think we honestly thought that money grew on trees in Canada.
Hey,
like I'm not joking.
I love it. No, that's what people think. I mean, when you go back home, that's what people think. They're like, "Oh, my sister. Oh, my niece.
Yes,
I need to come and visit you. I need to take the bus. Can you send me money?" Because they think that the money is just it rains money here.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And no,
so you thought that as a child.
And being like looking back to, we were so excited to like eat apples because we were tired of eating mangoes. Can you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
And now I'm like, I just
traded in mangoes for apples.
Oh, I know.
Girl.
I was a child. I was young. Now I look back and like, mangoes or apples? Yeah, there's no debate. But yeah, it was interesting because we were on the plane here. My sister, I remember, this is like a core memory for me. Obviously the first time we were all on a plane, and they gave us food on the plane, and I think, and this is back in those days, people could still smoke on the plane, and they just kept bringing food, and we were like, whose food is this for? And they brought us chocolate cake. We had never had chocolate cake.
Whoa.
And I remember my sister put ketchup. We knew ketchup, but our ketchup was like, if you've ever had like African ketchup, it's so much better than ketchup here. I don't know. But the ketchup that we had in Uganda was like, like you just wanted more of that. It's like the blue band, like the margarine. But I was really like, so we see the ketchup, we're like, oh, ketchup. So my sister takes the ketchup and puts it all over the chocolate cake.
No.
So that's not how you eat chocolate.
But girl, no.
That's not how it works. But yeah, it's like I always think like my dad and I haven't had a great relationship, but when we were like during the Civil War, my dad was super young, and before we even went to Kenya, he would go back and forth between the two countries because it was a very scary time for everybody, but also like my dad stood out because of his skin color. And
so just unclear, he was part African, or was he white?
He was mixed race, but he looked like he could be Cuban or white.
I see. Okay.
Or Indian. Like he just has one of those, could be from anywhere.
Okay, ambiguous, racially ambiguous.
Ambiguous, but obviously in Uganda, people have much browner skin, and so he was orphaned when he was 16.
Oh.
So he kind of had to figure things out for himself, and then all of a sudden he has all these kids that he's responsible for, and he would actually take me back and forth with him. Like he would do that walk, like do the hitch a ride or whatever. But back in those days, people didn't really hitch rides because you didn't know who you were getting the car with. But he would do that trip many times with me. So he would take me and we would go through the forest and sleep during the day and walk through the night. And that's the same walk that we did when we went to the refugee camp. So I had done it a few times with him. He once told me that he felt safer when I was with him. So I don't know if it meant that he felt if soldiers stopped him, they wouldn't harm him because he had a child, safer, or he felt safer having me with, I don't know. But we did that trip a few times. And I think that when people hear that you lived in a refugee camp or that you were born in a civil war, obviously it's very traumatic in the sense that I have seen dead bodies. I know what a gunshot sounds like. I know what a bomb sounds like. I would wake up hearing that sound of the rat-tat-tat of the guns and the sirens and the fires from the bombs and blood in lakes. It's because there's so many bodies. So I have seen that, but at the same time, even when we were in the camp, there was a sense of community where people helped each other and took care of one another. One of my fondest memories in the camp is this woman, Karen, who's a friend of my dad. She made ugali, which is like water and flour. And my favorite food to this day. But she mixed it up a little bit because we didn't have very much food. If we wanted protein or if we wanted meat, we would basically eat weevils, like the little bugs that would embed themselves in beans. And people would actually pick the weevils out of the beans and trade them. Like that's the meat that you had. So we would eat that. But this time she made the ugali, and she added like tomatoes and onion, because you couldn't really get tomatoes and onions because obviously you're in a camp, and a lot of the food that we ate was mostly carbohydrates. But I remember how delicious that was, and it's such like a happy memory for me. And even when before we came to the camp, my family comes from, like what people call slums. I don't even like the word slums, because those are communities. This is where people live, and this is where people pass, celebrate their life. And when we call it slums, it's kind of like, I don't know, it just feels so derogatory.
It dehumanizes it.
It dehumanizes people. Like my family's like essentially from the slums. Like I didn't have shoes for a time, and there's pictures of me without shoes, and we had like maybe 2 outfits, but we were happy. Like there were certain moments, like it's just, there was a lot of happiness. Birthdays were celebrated, and I don't know if people realize that happens too. It's not just the flies in the eyes and the big bellies that kind of image that is given about war-affected areas. There was a lot of happiness there, and I actually think we were probably happier before there than we were here.
And that actually, what you just said reminded me, but in a different way, of something that Paul Taylor said. So Paul, CEO from Food Share, but he talked about growing up in a lower income neighborhood, but saying like we shouldn't use the word poor, like we should be very specific. And he talked about we need to be clear about social deprivation versus financial deprivation. He was in a financially deprived situation. They didn't have money, but socially he had aunties, he had people around, there was joy, there was social cohesion. And that gets lost in these descriptions of certain communities. And what you're describing in that refugee camp is that kind of social cohesion and sense of community, which we know is actually a protective factor for health. And oftentimes in North America, because you're saying it might have been a happier time when you were there compared to here, in North America, which is much more individualistic and Eurocentric, we often lack that. And when we come here, we don't even realize sometimes that's something that we should keep. Sometimes we keep it, but sometimes we don't, or our children or the children's children don't keep it, right? Because we don't realize how valuable that is for our health.
I'm so glad you connected those two things, because when we came to Canada, we had a better, obviously, an opportunity for a better life, especially for me as a girl. Obviously, I have better access to things that I would never have if we had stayed in Uganda.
Of course.
But when we came here, we lacked that social, we lacked that village. But then eventually, after the refugee supports, and then you become deprived of that. You're considered to be very low income, right? We were getting clothes from the church. We were eating bologna sandwiches. I don't know if you've ever seen those bologna slices with the macaroni in it. That's what we were eating because it was the cheapest sandwich meat in the store. Right. And so when we came here, we didn't have that village, and we had racism, and we were living in a very homogenous community in London, Ontario at the time.
Right. Oh my gosh. Right. I forgot about that. It's not Toronto. It's London, Ontario.
Yeah.
Girl.
Yeah.
Girl.
It was, there's a professor at Western University, just look the man up, and some of the things that he believed just filtered into London society. And if you were a person that was not white in that community, you had a hard time. And I was a young kid.
Pause. Let's take a minute to fully identify the professor Nam is referring to. It's Dr. J. Philippe Rushton, who was a faculty member at Western University in the Department of Psychology from 1997 until his death in 2012. His research was racist and attempted to find differences in intelligence between racialized groups. On top of that, he made bogus claims that differences between races were due to biology or genetic differences. He became very famous, world famous in fact, and received financial support from the Pioneer Fund, a foundation formed in 1937 to promote eugenics and white supremacy. As horrible as that is, I also want to highlight that purely from a science perspective, he applied flawed techniques, unethical protocols, and practiced bad science. But Western University in London, Ontario retained him as faculty, so they basically gave him a platform to amplify white supremacy. For instance, he publicly stated, and I quote, "Whites have, on average, more neurons and cranial size than blacks. Blacks have an advantage in sport because they have narrower hips. But they have narrower hips because they have smaller brains." End quote. His racist conclusions were highly supported in London, Ontario, where Nam grew up, and, as she pointed out, he had a major influence on the town.
You know, there's a professor at Western University, and some of the things that he believed just filtered into London society. And if you were a person that was not white in that community, you had a hard time. And I was a young kid. I had a teacher who just failed me on all of my assignments. And coming to Canada, I was actually ahead. Even though my education had been broken up so much,
Yes.
we were ahead in the sciences and the math. And because we were, from Africa, whatever, I was put down a grade. And because school was very competitive in Uganda, very, very competitive. You wanted to be top 3 because they would make your grades public. And if you weren't top 3, you've just shamed the whole family. And I was always top 3. But it was those challenges. But then this is the thing that I wish that policymakers would consider. When we came to Canada, my father, he was a single dad with 4 kids. Eventually, my stepmother came. He sent for them and they came, and she had 2 kids. So there was 6 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is the burn. A lot of governments have policies for women that help women. So my stepmother was given the opportunity to learn how to use a computer. She was given an opportunity to meet women within whatever industry she wanted to be in. She had those supports. My father had 0. And we're coming from a patriarchal society where, men are here, women, and then we're coming to this society where the man, he's still responsible for the family, but yet he's not getting any kind of supports. And then, of course, tensions are going to come. He's got girls and all these things. And it was like a powder keg ready to explode, and the kids are the ones that end up suffering. So my father I break up my father in 2 different people. When we were back in East Africa, he was a different person than when we came here. Yeah. And it was the pressure, and then he started his, I'm not going to talk about him, what happened with his life, because that's his story to tell. But I ended up being kicked out of the house when I was 16, 17.
Oh, wow.
And that would never have been my father back home. But again, as I get older, I realize the challenges that he had. And as I've experienced more, the isms of the world,
yes,
and you think how could a young man of 20-something come to this country with 4 kids? I think he was 24, 25, with 4 kids, and have no support. Of course, it's going to
take a
end
toll.
up a different.
And I think he's a man, but also he's a black man, right? Yeah. I mean, I know you said he was racially ambiguous, but here it's not ambiguous. He's black here, right? And so what that meant, I think that's really important for people to understand, that when it comes to when we even want to talk in general public about racism, it's not just what happens to us. Like, you were, failed in your classes. I know you wrote about even being called the N-word by another, but a white refugee, right? So all refugees are not treated equally. You had your experiences, but then you're impacted by how racism impacted your father, right? There's the whole process of racialization, that people grow up in their own communities thinking that they're people, right? They're human beings. They're not wearing a label of black or whatever, but then they come to Canada and it's like, you've got that label and it's going to be even harder for you to have that upward mobility. Now, you were, I didn't know that you were kicked out of the house at 16, 17. And so this is, I mean, you are actually the manifestation of the term surthrival, because you're talking about, challenges back home and not fitting in because of the color of your skin. Then you come as a refugee. Then there's all of these challenges. And then as a teenager, being not being able to have that kind of nuclear family. But then somehow we see you on Much Music years later. Like, that is some serious surthrival skills. Do you want to just touch on that in some way? Like, what is the meteor that exists within you from which you did that launch?
I honestly surthrival. There, I got it.
Yes.
I love it. I always had this from a very young age. Like I said, there was, if you have an education, you could be anything. Like, your education can pull you out of poverty. And that was something that was instilled in me from a very young age. So even after I was kicked out of the house, I finished high school because I knew that I needed to get an education. And I think the thing that saved me was that the woman who sponsored our family to Canada became kind of like it felt, she was the first person to say I love you to me. And it kind of just gave me, I don't know, like, it just kind of put like a fire in my stomach. And unfortunately, the year that the year that I was kicked out, she died. And there's something of, like, when she died, I felt like, okay, now I don't have anybody. I don't have anybody to turn to. But there's another element of my story where my dad really was a good person in Uganda. He really tried to do the right thing and tried to do right by his kids. And there were moments when people would say, why didn't you leave your children? Because, I mean, he was a young guy. He could have just left and nobody would have been... Right. No one would have said anything, right? But he decided to stay and take care of 4 kids. But he was also taking care of one of his best friend's children. His friend died. And he had made my dad promise to take care of his son because his son's mother had passed away as well. And my dad did. And then when we came to Canada, we're at the airport in Kenya, we left him there. My dad had to leave him there because my dad was made to, one of the people at the airport was trying to, get money off my dad. My dad had nothing. And the man gave him an ultimatum. You possibly can't have 5 kids. You look too young to have 5 kids. And you need to choose which one is not getting on the plane. Wow. And so my dad left his friend's son at the airport. And I found out later there was another story behind all of this. But I remember there's this black and white picture of us at the airport. And in it, there's different expressions of everybody, my dad and my 3 siblings. But I am mad. I am angry. And it was because of what had just happened. Right. And so I have very clear moments like that. And it's not it is survivor's guilt, because why him and not me? right? So if I'm given these opportunities, an opportunity to live in this country and to squander it away, for me felt like it wasn't like it wasn't a negotiable. And again, I worked really hard, but I also had luck. I also happened to be in certain places at the right time. And I did certain things that helped. It wasn't like I just sat there and waited for it to happen.
No. It's where preparation meets opportunity. Exactly. You have that luck, right? Yeah. And you prepared.
Yeah.
And we see the results. And I was scared. It was amazing.
But doctor, I was scared too. I was scared because I knew that if I didn't do for me, who would do for me? I didn't have anyone waiting to help me. I knew that if
safety net.
There was no safety net. So it was like, if you don't do it, no one is going to do it for you. Like, I didn't want to, I almost became homeless when I was in university, and I lived in a rooming house, and that was like the lowest I hit. And I was sharing. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry, girl. It's a lot.
When I was at Ryerson, I ended up living in a rooming house, and I was sharing a house with like a unit with 4 strangers, and we shared a bathroom, and I didn't know the other girls. And so at night, and my room was really, really tiny, like maybe the size of my office. This is how big it was. I had a little bed, and a little desk, and just a little closet. And I remember it was so hot. There was no AC, and it was so hot in that room. And I remember at night, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to offer TMI, but I was so scared of using the bathroom at night. So I would have like a little bucket in my room that I could use at night. And I would lock my door, and I would put the chair in front of my door, because I was essentially sharing the space with strangers, and the strangers were, we're all going through our own things, but then their friends, I didn't know who they were, and just this constant feeling of being afraid. So I was afraid for my physical safety, but I was also afraid that if I ended up on the street, no one would care. So I had to figure out a way to just work hard. Like any opportunity that came my way, like I worked hard. So when I was living in that rooming house, I finally got an internship at Much Music. And a friend of mine, we had gone to an event where Master T was getting honored. And
right, he was host back then, right?
And so,
shout out to Master T.
Exactly. Shout out to Master T for real. And I approached him afterwards, and I didn't want to be like, I'm a groupie or whatever. And my friend said, just talk to him. And I went up to him and I told him, I'm a student at Ryerson. I'd love to intern at Much Music. He's like, call my producer on Monday. And then me being ridiculous, didn't. because I thought he was just being nice. And I didn't think he was being real.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So 2 weeks passed, and then I finally call her. She's like, "Oh, you're the person that T told me about. I was expecting your call 2 weeks ago. The position has been filled."
Oh no.
I was like, "What?" So after that, for a year, I would email, call,
hustle
that producer for like send my stuff, the stuff I was doing at Ryerson. And so by the time that I ended up in the rooming house, it had been about a year. And then they had called me and said, we have a spot open. Because she's like, fine, you can have the spot. Because I think she was tired of me calling and harassing her. And she's like, fine, just come for whatever. I think I was supposed to go there for like 6 weeks. Come, and then, you have your internship. And I went and I gave 1,000%. What do you want me to do? Okay, I did everything and anything that they asked me to do. I fell behind on my work, but I was like, in my school, but I was like, I need a job. And eventually, by the time I ended up in the rooming house, it had been a few months that I had been at Much Music, and a position came up on Electric Circus, like doing the graphics for Electric Circus. I don't know. I know this is a lot of detail. That position came up at Electric Circus, and they were like, "Do you want to do the graphics?" Because they liked my work ethic, and they were like, "We're going to give you a chance. We know you don't have any experience doing this, but we will train you." So they trained me to do graphics for Electric Circus. And I remember that check of $53 for my shift every Friday paid for my rent in the rooming house. And so the one check was my rent in the rooming house. And then the extra $150 helped food and expenses. And because I would go for days without eating. Right. So that's when it started. And once I was in there, but it was a lot of like, I always tell, whenever I have an opportunity to speak to young people, I always tell them, yes, it would be great to have people believe in you. It would be great to have a great relationship with your mother and your father and whoever, or your parents, your guardians, whomever. It's not always like that. And that has nothing to do with you. You're not your circumstances. You are your potential, so you have to be able to believe in yourself when other people don't.
Yes.
And I don't always believe in myself. I suffer from extreme imposter syndrome, but within those, like all the choices, all those decisions that you make, those choices that you make in that time period can impact the decisions that you're able to make over time.
Yes.
So it's like, don't give up on yourself, because the minute you give up on yourself, that's it.
That's it.
That's done. That's a wrap. And, your life is your life. It's your own. And how whether other people show up for you or not, we want that. But if we don't have that, you still got to show up for yourself.
You do.
You have to show up for yourself, especially when it's hard.
Because you matter, because you're here, you matter, and you have something to bring. I appreciate you sharing that with us because, again, part of that survival, I mentioned you can't have the strength without resistance, and you need to push through, and you don't always know what tomorrow is going to bring. But wow, like I'm just so amazed by what you have been able to do. Who would have known that? Again, I grew up seeing you on Much Music. You're, interviewing all these celebrities, not knowing the journey that you've been through as a Black woman, and then now on TVO. But I just want to take that moment, because sometimes we just need to take that moment when you reflect, because I think so many people are going to be inspired by your story, by your journey. What I'm also finding fascinating is, because honestly, I don't know if I would have had the foresight or resilience if I was in your shoes at a point where, again, you were going through all of this rooming house, and we're talking about Much Music. When you got the opportunity to be, like on TV and interviewing these celebrities, I remember you, first of all, using like your full, like Nam, right? Mm-hmm. I remember you with curly natural hair. Mm-hmm. Now, we've had other folks in journalism on the podcast, in particular, Camille Dundas from By Blacks comes to mind. And she talked a lot about the pressure to conform, right? To straighten your hair, to use, I know you have the middle name Mary, like I have an English middle name too, Kimberly, right? I don't use it. So I know, I stand up, I say, I'm Onyinye Chukwu, I'm Onye. I'm not using the European name, but I wasn't in a hot spot like you. So that's why I'm like, wow, you were going through all of that, got the opportunity at Much Music, but stood in your power. Or am I making assumptions? Were they celebrating, your name and your curly hair? I don't know. Mm-hmm. So let me know, like, was that a conscious decision to not necessarily conform, especially back then, to European standards? Or were you given the freedom then, and it was an amazing opportunity to let that shine?
It was more of me saying, this is what I'm going to do. I always felt a lot of pride coming from East Africa. And I reclaimed Namageni when I was in university. And when I started at Much Music, there was a floor director, and in television, the floor director is basically like your go-to, because they're on the floor with you. They're giving you signals of what's happening in the control room. They're basically your lifeline, not to sound too dramatic, but you need, there's a very close, intimate relationship.
Right.
And they're usually standing beside the camera, and you're communicating, body language, whatever. And so there was a floor director there, and she would say to me, why don't you change your name? It's too hard to say. It's too hard to pronounce because she couldn't pronounce it. You need
Actually,
to.
she could. She didn't want to.
She didn't.
Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
she didn't. I don't think she ever tried. But it was like, and she would say it with this like annoyed look on her face, like, "Who do you think you are?" kind of thing. And she would say to me with so much conviction, "No one is going to remember you." And she would say that to my face. And, you know, I'm in my early 20s and I'm kind of like, you know, again, this is all new to me and trying to figure out, you know, like, it's not like, like I said before, I was very shy. And then all of a sudden now I'm on TV. And so I spoke to Denise Donlin, who was the person that hired me. And I would talk to her and she would say, "You are using your name." Because I would say to her, I would go like, "I don't know what to do because this is what this person is saying. This is my name." And she's like, "No, you're using your name." And she would reaffirm that. And as far as my hair, I always said, "This is how my hair grows out of my head. I'm not changing it."
I love it.
Yeah. And I would get emails from people saying, my hair looks like a hot mess. I should wear a weave, all this stuff. I'm like, no, this is how my hair is. If you don't like it, you don't like it. So
I love it. I love it.
And I didn't realize that it would be so impactful, but it was just kind of like, it was something that really upset me because I was like, you're telling me that I need to change myself to make people like, I wouldn't say that to someone with straight hair to curly their hair up to make me comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, and people would say these things to you as if you don't have any kind of like emotions. But I will admit, the irony is that as I've gotten older, and even when I was started at TVO, I had a conversation with my manager and I said, "Should I straighten my hair?" I'm really feeling at TVO. I'm like, I'm really feeling like this pressure from people, like some anonymous people on the internet, whatever, say, "Oh, your head looks like a chia head. You look like Sideshow Bob." I'm like, I've heard that my whole life. Like, come with a little something more original.
Right.
But it was just like this, the fact that people can say things like that as if as if they own you. And they plant these little seeds of doubt. You know, like doubt, and you're like this self-hatred thing, you know, like this is, and now I have a daughter and I have a son, and I'm trying to I want them to celebrate who they are regardless of what anybody else says to them. And I always say, you're not responsible for anybody's feelings. You're only responsible for yourself. Even if I say something to you that you don't like, you tell me. You're not responsible for how I feel. You know, that my feelings are not your responsibility.
Thank you.
But it's like you start to doubt yourself. And I guess part of that, it became this narrative where I felt like anything that anybody, like what I brought to the table was dismissed because of my hair, you know? And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't want to talk about my hair. I just want you to see my experience, my curiosity, my intelligence, my, you know, like all the other things that I bring to my talent.
So talented,
you know,
talented as a journalist.
Yeah, thank you. But even just the microaggressions of like, oh, can I touch it? Or what does it feel like? Like, I would never, you know, and I'm still getting those kind of comments. So I have to admit that I don't know if it's because I'm tired and I have kids and I don't sleep well anymore. For now.
I'm with you with the kids. Mine are 5 and 7. So yeah.
Oh, you're in the thing. Yeah. But yeah, it's just kind of like, it's interesting how Black women's hair, how it can be so, like how the interest, it's like, this is how it's my hair.
And the violence, right? It's not just interest. It's not all innocent.
Yeah.
It's
Nobody
like this
should
thing,
stick
their hands in somebody's head. Like,
no,
it's dehumanizing. It's disrespectful. But also, what you just said, what you just described, is also a common phenomenon, and it happens. I'll speak to Black women because that's our experience. Of course, it happens to Black men. But the way systemic racism works is that it's like death by 1,000 cuts, and it takes a toll over time. So that was also part of my journey in medicine, coming out like really strong. And then towards the end of my training, just kind of like conforming and in some cases giving up because
you're tired.
You're tired, right? And you're the only, and you're constantly the target, and you're constantly performing. So it does. So maybe for some listeners, it seems odd that like when you were in your 20s and needed this opportunity and you're in a rooming house and all of this, you're like, no, this is who I am. This is my hair. And then now that you're this anchor on a major television show that people watch all across Ontario, now you're like, wait, should I change my hair? It's because you can only resist for so long. It's because you are human. It is because you can only be hit with these types of microaggressions day after day after day without sometimes, you know what I mean? Like thinking, okay, would it be easier? I can tell you for a fact, even if you straightened your hair, the same person who was dehumanizing you before isn't suddenly going to recognize you as human because it uplifts them to put you down. But my question is, now that you are at TVO, and again, you can speak to this or we can skip over it. It doesn't matter. Because once you're a Black woman in those spaces, I'm not seeing a bunch of other Black women holding the spot. It's the agenda with Steve Paikin, who was a white man. It's not your name on it, right? So there's going to be ways in which you're exoticized. There's going to be ways in which you experience misogynie noire, right? Mm-hmm. Of just having these stereotypes or being accused of being the angry Black woman. And I could be stretching here because I'm basing this on the literature, right? There are going to be ways that you are underappreciated or under remunerated because we know that a Black woman is 1.5 times more likely, according to Statistics Canada, to be overqualified for her job. That means she is underpaid, right? These are just common standard things. You can speak to if you're experiencing these, but I think the bottom line is, in this cocktail of things, how are you able to cope and stay well? You spoke about therapists. So it's two questions. Does any of what I just said sound familiar? And B, how are you able to cope and have joy in your day despite those things?
What you said does sound familiar. It's, I think it's interesting. I'll use an example. A few summers ago, we had, I am anchored, I'm initially when I started, I was Steve Paikin's back, the fill-in host. So when he was away, I would fill in. And then I was hired to do the summer show, the agenda in the summer, because Steve goes on holidays, and the summer show is different. It's a half hour, whereas the regular season is an hour long. And, when I first started, there was a few times when guests would come in and they couldn't hide their disappointment that it wasn't Steve, and which is fair because it's his show. And maybe there was a lack of communication from whoever was producing it. But it was one of those situations where I'm already feeling out of sorts because this stuff that's been happening behind the scenes, and then a guest comes in, and when you're doing these interviews, you only have like a minute or two to kind of build any kind of rapport, because I'm a stranger to this person unless if they've come in before. And you have to build trust very, very quickly, because our conversations on the agenda are longer. We're 20, 25 minutes, half an hour. So it's not like 4 or 5 minutes you can try to figure out how to go through that interview and just ask like 2 or 3 questions. You want to make them look good, and you also want to help the audience navigate the conversation, right? And so I've learned very fast to kind of put my feelings to the back again, let things roll off my back. But there was a few times when some very big names came in and they were disappointed that I wasn't Steve, and they would say it to my face. There was one person, a very, very famous feminist, who couldn't grasp my name. The person that they were with, who was talking on their behalf, and they're like, "What's your name?" Oh, the first thing was, I thought it was Steve was doing this interview. No, it's me. What's your name? Nam. Pam?
Girl,
Nam.
no.
Sam?
No.
Nam. Tam? Nam.
That's
And
violence. I'm sorry.
this is right before we go into the studio and for me to do the interview. I'm like, it's a 3-letter word. And so I laughed it off. I'm like, Nam like spam. Ha 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 ha. And she was still annoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go into the studio, I do the interview, and the first question, I've got to rein in all of my feelings, all of my nerves, all of my, to make the person that I am talking to comfortable and to have that exchange. And so I do it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you know me, you will see like the first 10 seconds, I'm off. I'm kind of like, like jittery or whatever. So that's when I was telling you about the panic attacks. That's when I started developing those panic attacks.
Pause. Now, I want to talk about the panic attacks. But first, I want to point out that the person who made Nam experience this violence was, to quote her, a famous feminist. Now, I don't know who this person is, but clearly she did not see Nam as a fellow woman who was deserving of her respect. This is not uncommon within mainstream feminism. Black women have been excluded for decades and not considered equal to white women, particularly by white feminists. And for Nam, this indignity was so violent that after this encounter, she began to develop panic attacks. We have now come full circle in this episode because this is what Nam mentioned at the beginning of the show when we spoke about her superpower. She said her superpower was letting things slide off her back. This helped her as a young child, dealing with difficult family dynamics, dealing with feeling like an outsider in her own community, and as a young journalist in her 20s, struggling to make ends meet and make a name for herself in the industry. But that was a survival mechanism. It works until it doesn't work. And what's so important here is to understand that what you need to survive is different than what you need to thrive. Nam talked about going to see a therapist. So once she developed the panic attacks from these microaggressions, these everyday indignities that she was facing at work, which to be honest, will eat at anybody over time, she sought help. Through therapy, she was able to regain perspective, learn new techniques, and more intentionally reframe her experiences to see the positive again. This is a key lesson. We must recognize when our old ways of coping no longer work and when to seek help so we can move to the next level of well-being. Let me say it one more time. The skills that we use to survive are going to be different than what we need to thrive. And it's okay to seek help from others as we make that transition.
So we go into the studio, I do the interview, and the first question, I've got to rein in all of my feelings, all of my nerves, all of my, to make the person that I am talking to comfortable and to have that exchange. And so I do it. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you know me, you will see like the first 10 seconds, I'm off. I'm kind of like, like jittery or whatever. So that's when I was telling you about the panic attacks. That's when I started developing those panic attacks. There was another person who came in for the summer show, and the summer show, the chairs are arranged in a way where it's kind of like more intimate. This is before COVID. They're closer together. And the person sat with their body language, like with their legs farthest away from me. And by question number 2, you see this person, if you're watching on the video, but if you're listening, he essentially, they lift themselves up like this and then turn their legs toward me as if they've now decided, oh, okay, she knows what she's talking about. Now I'm going to engage with her. But physically before, they were like this. And so you have to, in that moment, I'm like, I have to figure that out. And being the only one there, it's kind of, if I start crying, then I'm being too precious, too emotional. If I get upset and I cuss this person out and, tell them what's what, because a 3-letter name is not that difficult, then I'm the angry Black woman. So it's all trying to navigate all these things. Or when someone says something that is extremely offensive, and then they can say it's a joke, and then I'm like, where's the punchline? But because they've said it's a joke, then everybody around me is wondering why I can't see the jokeness in it, even though I'm the person hurt by it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's been a lot of that, and a lot of feeling like I'm outside of the circle and I'm not part of the clique. But the way that I've learned how to, again, turn the situation to work in my favor, I'm a public servant. I serve the people of Ontario. And I've been told that I'm too radical, I'm too lefty, and I'm at the table of, years and years ago, how many Black people were in newsrooms? How many of us were in the position where you can say, this is the idea, or I want this guest to come in? Like when we did the panel with you, that was something that me and Chantel, 2 women of color, pitched.
Right.
When you came on the show to talk about that, that was interesting to us because it was lived experience from our friends, from us. Yes. And if we weren't at that table, that wouldn't have been brought up. So there is
about Black women and Indigenous women and maternal health, right? Yeah, that was very powerful.
And that was years ago. And now we're hearing more about it, right? That was years ago that we talked about when we had you on the show. Now we have Beyonce talking about her experiences of being pregnant. Serena Williams talking about it. But Chantel and I worked on that, and if we hadn't been in that table, we wouldn't have been talking about that. So that's the way that I've approached it. If you see me and you want to classify me into this box because I trigger something in you, I'm not responsible for that. Like the great Julie Black said, I'm not responsible. Take your feelings to the altar because I'm not responsible for that, right?
Yes,
yes. And you do have those moments when you do feel hurt, when you do feel misunderstood, when you just want people to receive you as an individual instead of you're Black, you're a woman, you're a former refugee, you're all those labels, and they flatten your experience and they flatten you. And then they wonder why, people quit journalism, why Black people are quitting journalism and leaving it. But I serve the people of Ontario. I get emails from viewers saying, thank you so much for writing about XYZ. If I write about, inequality, if I write what it's like to be without a home, like what it's like to live in a rooming house, I have a lived experience that mirrors a large percentage of people in this province. And that has power. And I'm speaking for those people. And if somebody was to say, well, you're biased, whatever, well, all of us are shaped by the world, by our life experiences. I can admit that. My life experiences shaped who I am. But there's this thing in journalism where people refuse to believe that they're not robots. Journalists are not robots. The world does shape our perspectives.
Of course, the objectivity is a myth.
It's a myth. We all have biases.
That people think that they're objective.
Yes. We all have biases. We all have blind spots. But you failing to admit it is a problem. That's what creates this distrust of the media.
Yes.
Admit your blind spot, work on it. Admit your biases or acknowledge them, work on it so you can be a better journalist. And you can be a fuller journalist instead of, I'm not, no, you're not a robot. Yeah, we also know that AI also is kind
has
of,
biases,
has biases.
Anti-Black racism built in.
Exactly.
So even the robot don't work.
Exactly. So admit that. And then,
Yes.
Lived experience matters. And
Yes.
you can't, journalism is about human beings. You can't separate the experiences of the majority because you've never experienced it. You know what I mean? And
No,
I've lived a lot of that stuff. I've lived a lot of the stories that we cover. So that makes me a better journalist. And so that makes me feel more confident. And if I'm shut out of certain circles because I'm too much of whatever someone thinks, then okay, I can't control that. What I can control is the focusing on my work, speaking for people, not even, and I even hate saying that because everybody has their own voice, but there are a lot of people who don't have the opportunity to use those voices. When people say
amplifying voices, you're amplifying what you're hearing in the margins.
I don't like it when people say I'm speaking for. No, everyone everyone should speak for themselves. But amplify.
You're amplifying voices in the margins. Yeah.
Yeah, and being able to be at that table and say, no, I don't think this is how you see it. I don't think it's how it is. And being able to push back a little bit, and if that makes me a contrarian or a radical or whatever. But I think it's important to have those discussions at those tables because you can't just have a homogenous group in media. You need lived experiences, you need different perspectives, and you need it needs to reflect the people that you are purporting to represent.
Yes. And I want to thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. I want to acknowledge that you recognize that you are serving community. And I want to say that we see you. We are so proud of you. We deeply appreciate you. We appreciate you being in that space. I also want to say that I'm happy that you said that you went to see a therapist because as much as, especially as Black women, we want to serve community, we can't do that sustainably if we are not okay.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a beautiful thing, everything that you're able to do as far as resisting and letting things fall off your back. But coping mechanisms, which is what we do, right, to deal with stress, work until they don't work. And when you realize that you had the panic attacks and they weren't working, you went and sought therapy. And that's what we need to do as Black women. Therapy comes in different places and spaces because not everybody can afford full therapy, but you sought the help that was available to you. Now, another thing that is critically important is also finding space to have people who validate you, who also see you. So I hope you're getting that. But another one is finding joy. And so my final question, as we wrap up, as we have been so inspired by the work that you're doing, as we are, not all of us are on Twitter sending you your flowers, but trust me, the flowers are there. We feel you in our spirits. We feel the work that you do. So let us find out, Nam, what brings you joy?
Oh, you're going to make me cry. Thank you so much for those kind of words. It's really nice to hear. I find I love, I'm obsessed with plants.
Okay.
I used to not be very, very green thumb, but my auntie in Uganda, she knows every species of every, I don't know, you go outside, she's like, this is this and this and that. And I never thought that I would be that. So I'm trying to tap into my lineage. Remember I said that I'm trying to, so the things that I do know, I'm trying to tap into those people's histories and try to see if there's a connection, how I connect to it. And so taking care of plants has been a beautiful thing. This summer, I'm going to try again to garden and grow things in soil. And the thing that ultimately brings me the greatest joy are my children. And I know it sounds so cliche, but it really, there's something, I never used to think about next month, next year, 10 years. I always lived for the moment, I didn't even think that I would see 40 something. So having my children has given me this incredible foundation it doesn't just feel like home because I know my children are not mine and they don't belong to me. They will grow up and leave and have, I pray, beautiful lives.
Yes.
But I have this hashtag that I use called hashtag second childhood. I'm able to see life through their eyes, and it's like, yeah, and it's like the curiosity, the joy, the wonder, the simplicity. I think as we get older, we make things more complicated than they need to be. And also just to be present. It reminds me to be present because I have a tendency to live in my head. And being around my kids, it just kind of refocuses me. And whenever I feel like, oh, I'm tired, I can't fight anymore, I don't want to do this, I just want peace of mind, I'm like, I focus on them. And it makes me feel a bit stronger. And it also makes me feel lighter and happy that, like a part of me, like, it's such a full, like my granny who helped us come to Canada, like if she hadn't met us or helped us, I probably wouldn't be here, not to be exaggerating. My kids probably wouldn't be here. And just being able to see all, like how that love, like that, that seed of love, how it's manifested itself to, how I loved myself when I didn't have anyone to love me. And then now I have these children who love me in in a way that I've never been loved. And it's also given me an opportunity to love in a way that I've never been able to love before. So it gives me, like, I just feel like the luckiest person on this planet.
That is so beautiful. It is based in love, and you're thinking about the next generation, and you're serving community, and you're taking care of yourself. My thing right now is all about being a good ancestor. I know you are looking into your ancestry, but I hope that you feel in your heart and your soul and your spirit, Nam, that you are a beautiful ancestor in the making, because you are planting seeds beyond even what you know of beauty and love. And so we thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. O. I appreciate it.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye Norum, and she's our host. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, executive producer of the show. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and JL Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson, and Javiera Violeta Duran Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant, and Corinne Bent Womack is our anti-racism consultant. Our student associate producers are Xavier Oshinowo and Afia McIntosh. Veronica Ng is our graphic design consultant, and the RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys. Special thanks to Awit Siem and Darrell Carpentier for their voiceover work. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is racehealthhappiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. This is Dr. Carl. On behalf of the whole RHH team, we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/racehealthhappy. We are learning together to surthrive. Thank you for your support. The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.